Namaste and good morning to everyone. Today's talk will be on the subject of Tamil literature and its contribution in nation building. Before delving into the subject, let's look at how vast Tamil literary heritage is. It spans over 2,300 years. It's truly classical in every sense. It's in the league of the other classical literatures of India like Prakrita, Samskrita, and Pali. Just to give an outline of this colossal and vast Tamil literature, it starts with what is called Sangam classics, Sangam meaning the assembly of poets and scholars. The Sangam literature had a growth over 600 years. The scholars say that from 300 BCE to 300 CE. That is the time period during which these Sangam classics evolved. So later they were compiled into two great collections, anthologies you can call. So one was Yettu Thogai, which means like 8 anthologies, and the other is called Pattu Pattu, meaning 10 books. So this is Sangam classics, and there were about 500 odd poets whose poems have been compiled into these collections. And then we have the post-Sangam era, and there are 18 works that are celebrated as Padinankil Kanakku, and Tirukkural, the celebrated ethical masterpiece of Tamil, is the chief among them. And then we have a lot of works on grammar, poetics, aesthetics. It starts all the way from the ancient Tolgapiyam and to the medieval work Nannul. And then we come to the period of great kavyas or epics. So in Tamil, we have very rich repository of kavyas. Silappadigaram, Manimekalai, Kambaramayanam, Periya Puranam, Villi Bharatam. These are some of the great Tamil kavyas. And then we have a colossal bhakti literature. It is both Shaiva and Vaishnava in nature. It's a very unique feature of Tamil because in most of the Indian languages, we have a lot of Vaishnava bhakti literature and very meager or minimal Shaiva bhakti literature. But in Tamil, the Shaiva bhakti literature is organized into 12 books called Tirumurai, and together there are about 15,000 verses contained in these Tirumurais. And the Vaishnava bhakti literature, which is like 4,000 verses, is compiled into Nalayira Divya Prabandham. So this is the earliest in non-Sanskrit bhakti poetry in the Indian literature scene. There are many other allied works to this bhakti literature like commentaries, explanatory texts, and books like that. And then we are followed by a lot of medieval literature. So that includes varied bhakti works, philosophical texts, court poetry, assorted topics, and many different literary forms. Just to give a glimpse, there is this literary form called Pillai Tamil in Tamil. What it means is that a great deity or a heroic person like a king or a sage, the poet considers that person as a child. In the first 10 months, what are all the childish plays of that deity or a person, it is superimposed on his acts and deeds and teaching. For example, if somebody is writing a Pillai Tamil on, let us say, Lord Shiva or Lord Skanda, so all the great deeds of the deity are sung as if a child is doing that. A 3-month-old or 4-month-old child is doing that. This is a peculiar literary form in Tamil. And then we have the modern literary renaissance, like all other Indian languages. So the nationalist movement, the social reform and those kind of things in Tamil as well. So all through this outline that I have given, you will see that it has many commonalities with the pan-Indian Indian literature. If you take the literature of any Indian language, this is how it will be. But of course, the Tamil has its own unique splendor and expressions. But apart from that, it is Indic in every sense of the word. This great literature is quite less known outside Tamil Nadu. That is something which both the Tamils as well as the Indian government need to address to bring this literary wealth everywhere through translations and other means. Whenever we talk of Tamil, the name of Agastya cannot be missed. We all know Agastya. He is a Vedic Rishi, and in some accounts he is considered as one of the Sapta Rishis, and he has the Suktas attributed to him in the Rig Veda, the earliest Indic text. Agastya is mentioned in the Ramayana, in the Mahabharata, and many Puranas. And all the legends about Agastya mentioned in ancient Sanskrit works and ancient Tamil works are exactly similar. For example, Agastya held the ocean in his Kamandala, the water pot. When the Asuras went into the ocean and the Devas could not vanquish them, they requested Agastya to drain the whole ocean, and he held the entire ocean in his Kamandala. This is one legend. There is another legend that says he was the first Vedic Rishi to cross the Vindhya mountain and step into the south, which was called Dakshinapatha. So this legend again is there in both the Tamil as well as the Sanskrit texts. According to the Puranas, he lived in the Malaya mountain. So Malaya is one of the Saptagiris, the 7 great mountains in the Indic tradition. So currently the Podigai Hills, which is in the southernmost part of the Western Ghats, that is identified with the Malaya mountain, and that is where Agastya is supposed to have lived. There are many places named after Agastya in that region. So, Agastya is called Agattiyar in Tamil as per the Tamil linguistic grammar rules. And the biggest glory of him is that the divine origin of the primeval sounds of Tamil, they emerged out of Shiva's Damaru as per the Tamil tradition. And they were given to Agastya. So traditionally he is considered as the father of Tamil language. So those who are familiar with the Sanskrit grammar and the Panini's Ashtadhyayi, you have a similar legend. It says, Nritta Vasane Nataraja Rajo Nanada Dhakkam Navapanchavaram. When Shiva sounded his Damaru, the primeval sounds came out of that. And from those, the Panini composed what is called the Maheshwara Sutras, from where the Sanskrit grammar emerged. You see, a similar legend exists in the case of Tamil as well. And in some of the later Tamil texts like Thiruvilayadar Puranam, it says that when the Shiva sounded Damaru, from the one face the Sanskrit emerged, and from the other face the Tamil emerged. So both these are divine languages, and both are the gifts of Shiva to the humankind. So this is how this legend has evolved. And Agastya is credited as the author of the first Tamil grammar. It is called Agatyam. So this work is not extant. It is not available at all, but it is mentioned by name in some later works. So perhaps it was lost due to floods or other natural calamities. But the next text in line, Tolkappiyam, is attributed to the great scholar Tolkappiyar, who was one of the 12 disciples of Agastya. So, the lineage of Agastya just continues in the Tamil tradition, unbroken. And there is also a legend that he led the assembly of poets in the Tamil Sangam in Madurai. And he is honored and worshipped as a great guru and acharya in the Shiva Bhakti and Shakti worship traditions across India, especially in Tamil Nadu. There are many sculptures of Agastya in the ancient Tamil temples. He is also considered as the father of the Siddha medicine, that is a form of Ayurvedic medicine popular in Tamil Nadu. So just like in the Sanskrit tradition, a lot of ancient knowledge is attributed to Vyasa. He is the author of so many things and the giver of so varied knowledge. Agastya is in that position in the Tamil tradition. But it is to be remembered that he is also a Vedic Rishi. He is not something alien to the Indic landscape. Interestingly, Agastya is also worshipped in many Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, and Malaysia. In the famous temple in Yogyakarta in Indonesia, it's called the Prambanan Hindu temple, there is a beautiful statue of Agastya. They call him as Shiva Rishi. And many cultures in Southeast Asian countries, they have a tradition that Agastya was the one who brought culture to their islands. So this is very similar to Agastya crossing over the Vindhyas to the south and enriching the Tamil language. So we see a great uniformity in all these traditions and legends. Coming to the Sangam literature, you will be surprised or delighted to know that Vedic Dharma and the land of Bharata is mentioned very explicitly in those texts. Here is a poem from Purananuru, one of the Sangam classics. Vada adu panipadu neduvarai vadakkum, tena adu urugezhu kumariyin terkum, guna adu karaiporu todugadal gunakkum, kuda adu tondrumudir bauvattin kudakkum. Just sounds so different. Even Tamil people of today cannot comprehend much of this 2000-year-old poetry. So here is its meaning. North of the northern snowy peaks of the high mountain, south of the mighty Kumari in the south, east of the dug-up eastern ocean with waves crashing its banks, west of the ancient and old western ocean, may your glory grow. So this is how the poet blesses a king. As you see, all the natural boundaries of Bharatavarsha is mentioned beautifully in this poem. In fact, the high mountain is nothing but the Himalayas. So in this poem, the name Himalaya is not mentioned, but there are a few other poems where Imayam, which is the Tamil word for Himalaya, is mentioned. And another beauty in this verse is that it says east of the dug-up eastern ocean. So as per the Puranas, the eastern ocean was called Sagara because it was dug up by the king Sagara. And the western ocean is the natural ocean which existed from the beginning. So this nuanced Puranic note, the poet embeds in this poetry beautifully. And the king who is blessed here, his name is more interesting. He is called Pandiyan Pal Yagasalai Mudugudumi Peruvazhudi, meaning a Pandya king with many Yagashalas. This is his name. So there are many interesting references to Vedas in many other works like Vedas, Yajnas, Brahmanas, etc. And there are these 5 deities for the 5 Tamil landscapes. So Kurinji is the hillside, and Skanda is the god of that region. Mullai is the pastoral land. Vishnu or Krishna is the land of that region. Marudam is the wetland forming area, and Indra, the lord of the rains, is its deity. Neidal is the coastal and the seashore region, and Varuna is its deity. And Palai is the dry and arid region where the farming and all other activities stopped, and people even indulge in things like robbery for their livelihood. And Durga, by the name Kotravai, is the deity of this region. So if you see these 5 deities, they are all the Vedic Hindu deities. So the ancient Tamil society also worshipped the same deities. Here is another poem which is very interesting. A very poor poet goes to a Chola king and praises him, and the king showers him with gifts. And this poor man, laden with the gifts, goes to his village, and his entire family is thrilled at seeing those jewels, the earrings, the necklaces, and the golden ornaments, and they just don't know what to do. And the poet says their state was like that of the monkeys that were seeing the ornaments that were scattered on the ground by the Sita who was abducted by Ravana. And this Sita is the wife of the great and mighty Rama. This is what the poet says. Kadundiral Iraman udanpunar Sithayai, Valittagai Arakkan Vavviya Nyandrai, Nilamser Madarani Kanda Kurangin, Semmugap Perungilai Idai Polindangu. This is the poem. So here, as you see, the poet is using a Ramayana incident as a metaphor in his poetry. He is actually not writing Ramayana, but an incident in the Ramayana, if he uses this as a metaphor to describe a condition in his life, then you can imagine how Ramayana must have spread all over the Tamil country and known to everyone. Then only a poet can use that as a metaphor. So similarly, there is another poem which has a very interesting Mahabharata reference. The poet says that, oh, you are the Chera king who fed the armies of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas in the great Bharata war. Now, it's impossible that the king went there and fed all the armies. Perhaps this is a reference where the king, claims his ancestry to the Kuru dynasty of the Bharata. It's a poetic way of saying that. And all the Shiva legends, like the burning of Tripura, the drinking of poison, these are mentioned. And avatars of Vishnu, like Narasimha, Varaha, Vamana, Parashurama, these are all mentioned in the Sangam poetry. The Skanda, who is called Murugan in Tamil culture, all the legends associated with him, his birth, his slaying of the Asuras, these are all exactly the same as they are in the Sanskrit texts. And there are poets who are named after, the Vedic personages. There is a poet Kapilar, named after Kapila. There is Gautamanar, named after Gautama. There is Uruthirankannanar, named after Rudra. And there is even a poet called Valmikiyar, named after Valmiki. So this is how the entire Sangam classics were filled with Indic idioms. And coming to Tirukkural, I would call it as a supreme and unique text of Indic wisdom. In fact, in Tamil Nadu, it is held in very high esteem by Tamil people all through the ages. It is called Tamil Veda. It really belongs in the Dharma Shastra and Smriti genre, in the overall. It's dated around the 3rd century CE. There is scant historical details about its author, Thiruvalluvar. All we know is that he was a great Maharshi who lived at that time. And Tirukkural has 3 books, Aram, Porul, Inbam. These exactly mapped to what is called Trivarga, Dharma, Artha and Kama, the 3 goals of human life. And the moksha is not stated separately. It is actually a part of dharma itself. This is how it is positioned even in texts like Mahabharata, as the Sanskrit scholars would say. It actually gets added as the fourth Purushartha later, even in the Sanskrit texts. And all over Tirukkural, there is praise of Vedas, Yajnas, Rishis and cows. And the Hindu deities like Indra, Vishnu, Lakshmi are mentioned. And the ahimsa is stressed greatly. This has made some scholars to attribute Jain authorship to Tirukkural rather than a Vedic one. But still it is Indic. The Jain and Buddhist traditions are as much Indic as Vedic. And there are sizable Sanskrit words in Tirukkural. And there are even parallels to Sanskrit sayings. For example, there is a Tirukkural that says, the senses should be restrained like the tortoise. The tortoise compresses its organs to itself. So this is straight away a parallel from the Gita. Kurmonganiva sarvashaha, the Gita says. So there are traditional commentaries to Tirukkural. There are 10 commentaries, all written around 10th and 13th centuries. And the foremost of these are by Parimel Alagar, who was a great Vedic scholar. And in fact, he himself establishes the connection between the Vedic Dharma and Tirukkural in his commentary in great detail. And then we come to Kavyas. So Silappadigaram is the story of a woman called Kannagi. So from an ordinary housewife, she becomes a fighter, demanding justice for the unlawful killing of his husband by the Pandya king. She burns down the Madurai city and then gets elevated to the status of Patini, meaning a Pativrata goddess. So this story itself is very Indic, as you know. And this epic is authored by a Jain monk called Ilango Adigal around 2nd to 4th century CE. But it is filled with Hindu idioms and concepts. It speaks of the consolidation of 3 great kingdoms, Chera, Chola and Pandya, which are also mentioned in the epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. And it has interesting linkage to Himalaya and Ganga. So when Kannagi becomes a goddess, the Chera king Senguttuvan, he wants to build a temple for her. You know what he does? So he goes with a big army, defeats some kings on the way, goes all the way to Himalayas, takes a sacred stone from the Himalayan region and bathes it in the Ganga, carries Ganga water in pots, brings it and builds a temple for Kannagi in his region. What a beautiful imagery to link North and South India in this ancient Tamil epic. And then we have Manimekalai, which is a Buddhist epic. It's a sequel to Silappadigaram. So here there is this woman, the protagonist. She becomes a Buddhist nun and does a lot of noble deeds. And this epic has narration of philosophical debates among the 6 darshana schools like Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Vedanta. The scholars of these philosophical schools, they debate among each other. There is a very detailed description of this debate. And then there are other kavyas like Jivaka Chintamani. There is a Udayana Kumara Kavya, which is like the Udayana story from Sanskrit, translated in Tamil. There is Yashodhara Kavya, and the Brihat Katha, the famous literature in the Paishachi language, has its Tamil equivalent in a text called Perungadai. And continuing this tradition of kavyas, we have Kambaramayana, which is an all-time magnum opus of Tamil literature. It has 10,000 verses, a profound and enchanting poetry. It's essentially Valmiki's Ramayana retold, but with minimal deviations and very nuanced embellishment by the poet Kamban. The major difference is that he establishes the avatarahood and the divine nature of Rama and Sita right from the beginning unlike Valmiki, because this was written around, around 10th, 11th century, when Rama had become the avatar of Vishnu all over the nation, and there were temples for Rama. So that's the only major deviation from Valmiki. And Ravana, though he is depicted as a very powerful anti-hero, he is despised as a man of very base instincts and demonic. He is nowhere extolled in Kambaramayanam. So you suddenly hear some Tamil people hailing Ravana as a Dravidian king, etc. So those are all 20th century fabrications. There is nothing in the Tamil tradition that extols Ravana that way. And the style and expression of Kambaramayanam is very similar to the Mahakavyas of Sanskrit. And then we have this Periya Puranam, which tells the stories of 63 Nayanmars, the Shiva devotees. So it's like a hagiography of saints written in a beautiful way. And it is a precursor to many such texts. So in Hindi, there is this text called Chaurasi Vaishnavon Ki Varta, which tells the stories of the saints of North India. This Periya Puranam, the 12th century text, is actually a precursor to many such bhakti texts all over India. So Villi Bharatam is the Mahabharata written in Tamil by Villi Putturar in 14th century. It has about 4,300 verses, very emotional and dramatic in style. It's alive even now through folk performances in Draupadi Amman temples. So there are quite a few temples for Draupadi in rural Tamil Nadu. So where the Mahabharata performances use this literary text as a song for their art form. Next, coming to Bhakti literature, I'll say that Tamil country is the origin of Bhakti movement that engulfed the whole of India in an ocean of devotion for a few centuries. I am not making this up. In fact, it is mentioned in the tradition itself. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is this episode of Bhakti Devi going and waking up two old and worn out men. They are called Jnana and Vairagya. So they are like in a dilapidated condition. And then this young girl called Bhakti, she wakes them up and says that, you are in a very worn out condition. Now Bhakti is the one which will revive both of you. And then she says, Utpanna Dravide Chaham. She tells her story. She says, I was born in the Dravida land, which refers to Tamil country. And then she says, I grew up a little bit in Karnataka. Then I traveled through the Maharashtra. And then I was all through these lands. I was coming to Krishna Bhumi, Vrindavana, where I saw both of you. So this verse is there in Srimad Bhagavatam. And in Hindi Bhakti poetry, there is this line, Bhakti Dravida Upaji Laye Ramanand. What it means? Bhakti was born in Dravida, which means Tamil country, and Ramananda brought it here. And as we all know, Ramananda was the guru of the great Kabir Das. So you see here, the North Indian Bhakti movement itself acknowledging that the Bhakti was born in the Dravida land. And remember, Dravida here is just used to denote a region, the southern region of the country, and not a race or a ethnic group. This is very important. And in a similar manner, all through Tamil Bhakti literature, the word Arya is just used to denote noble and lofty qualities. Pasamam Pattarittu Parikum Aryane, so sings a saint about Shiva. He calls Shiva as the Arya, and Rama is called Arya in Tamil Bhakti poetry for his great and dharmic qualities. And this Tamil Bhakti movement predates all such movements of India. Its time period is 6th to 9th century CE, pretty early. So there are two distinct Bhakti movements here, the Nayanmars or the Shiva Bhaktas, Shiva saints, and Alvars, who are the Vaishnava sects. Nayanmars are 63 in number. They came from all stratas of the society, the farmers, traders, hunters, butchers, and all kind of communities. It included women as well. And 4 of them are the major poets, and they are considered as acharyas: Appar, Sundarar, Sambandar, and Manika Vasagar. So they went around to various Shiva temples of Tamil Nadu and sang beautiful poems, and that are compiled into the Shaiva canon. Similarly, Alvars are 12 in number. All of them are poets, and it included the famous woman saint Andal, who took Sri Krishna himself as his husband and sang devotional poetry. In that way, she is the predecessor to Mirabai of the North India. And the Alvars poems are compiled into Nalayira Divya Prabandham. And Nammalvar is another major sage philosopher called Shatakopa. It is from his poems that Sri Ramanujacharya derived his unique Vedanta philosophy that went by the name Visishtadvaita. So, a Tamil Bhakti literature has inspired the creation of a unique philosophical Vedanta school itself. In fact, Sri Ramanujacharya himself acknowledges it. And through his great missionary work, this Vaishnava Bhakti spread all over India through many channels. We have a successive line of gurus like Vallabhacharya, Nimbarkacharya, Ramanandacharya, all the way to Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Goswami Tulasidas. They all attribute their inspiration to Sri Ramanuja, whose inspiration is the Alvars poetry. So that way, and this Bhakti movement gives vigor and life to the literature of all Bhasha languages of India, like Marathi, Hindi, Rajasthani, Gujarati, Bangla, Assamese, Odia, Odisha, every language. Bhakti poetry is the major literature in all these languages. And in a similar way, the Shiva Bhakti poetry, it has its interaction with the Kashmir Shaiva sects and the Karnataka Veera Shaiva sects of Basaveshwara, and also the Natha and Siddha traditions of North India. In fact, the Gorakhnath, who is the chief of Navanatha Siddhas as per the tradition in North India, he is one of the major Siddhas of the 18 Siddha group called Padinan Sittar in Tamil Nadu as well. And this Bhakti movement is in such a matured form in Tamil Nadu that by the 10th century CE, all the texts were codified. They were taught to all people, like the Vedas are taught in a traditional way. And the icons of saints in bronze and stones were made, and they were worshipped in the temples. And the commentaries were written, and the dance and musical forms were evolved around this Bhakti poetry. So, such was the glory of the Bhakti literature in Tamil. And even today, when you go to Tamil Nadu, you see these grand and huge historic temples of Tamil Nadu, which are the living heritage of this movement. So, when you walk around, you will see the Vedas and the Sanskrit mantras chanted along with the Tamil Bhakti hymns sung side by side. So, the poet Manika Vasagar sings in one poem, Innisai Veenayar Yaழினர் ஒருபால், இருக்கொடு தோத்திரம் இயம்பினர் ஒருபால், துண்ணிய பிணைமலர் கையினர் ஒருபால், தொழுகையர் அழுகையர் துவள்கையர் ஒருபால். What this means? He just describes the scene in a temple. He says, on one side, there are people singing in sweet voices with the veena. On this other side, some great Brahmins are chanting the Rig Veda. On the other side, some people are singing Tamil hymns, and some people are crying, some people are prostrating, some people are holding the garlands in their hands. So, with such ecstasy, he describes a temple scene in Tamil Nadu. You can actually see such scenes even today. So, it is a monument to the living Bhakti literature tradition in Tamil. And coming to the modern age, the Tamil literature went through all the major currents, like every other Indian languages. There is modernity itself, which was a new thing, the emergence of printing press and the proliferation of books. So transition from palm leaves and manuscripts to books, it was a great break for the literary world. Along with modernity, there was nationalism, social reform, Hindu Renaissance, heralded by saints like Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Tamil pride, the Dravidianism, Marxism, subaltern expressions, influences from Western literary fads like structuralism, cubism, postmodernism, magical realism. All these had their influence on Tamil literature as well, the modern literature. It all started with Subramanya Bharati. He was the pioneer and the great modern literary icon in Tamil. He was a nationalist poet, journalist, philosopher, reformer, humanist, and a Vedantin, a multifaceted personality. He wrote a great modern kavya called Panchali Shapatham, in which Draupadi is a symbol and metaphor for Bharat Mata. So the Draupadi's Vastraharana in the Kauravas' court is depicted as the way the Bharat Mata is trampled and enslaved by the British colonialism. And the Pandavas and the Panchali, they take a pledge to overthrow Kauravas. So this was a rousing call for freedom and liberty. And Subramanya Bharati enshrined values like dharma, love, brotherhood, freedom, and a fiery spirit to stand up against evil in Tamil poetry. And if you take after that, the major writers of fiction like novels and short stories, I will give a few major and well-known names, and every one of these great writers were very nationalistic. In fact, it's interesting that though the Dravidianist movement had its sway in the political field, none of the major and well-respected literary figures of Tamil were even aligned to that ideology, or even Marxism for that matter. It's interesting. So Kalki Krishnamurti, he wrote much loved historical romances around the Chola and Pallava kingdoms. So he had Gandhian views. And Jayakantan, who was a Jnanapith awardee, so he wrote works dealing with underclass life. So he had some meanderings with Marxism and spirituality, mysticism, but he firmly stood for nationalistic values. And Lasa Ramamritam, who wrote great novels exploring womanhood and directly linking with the feminine as the essence of existence, the Shakti. And Ashokamitran, he wrote stories exploring the complexities and nuances of life of ordinary people in urban settings. He was also a nationalist. And Jayamohan, who is still living, so he is a prolific writer. His celebrated novel Vishnupuram is a multi-layered fiction with pan-Indian themes, involving Buddhism and all philosophical schools. And he is also currently writing the fictionalized rendering of Mahabharata. Though he had postmodernist influences, he firmly stands for Indic civilization and nationalist viewpoint. So this is the case. And even in the literary criticism field, there were great people like Venkat Swaminathan, who was a sharp and erudite literary critic and thinker. He exposed and stood up against Marxist influences and some parochial influences in Tamil literature. And he argued for nuanced and sublime artistic sensibilities in literature and arts. So this is the modern literature scene. And now I'll conclude my talk with a controversial topic. So we know that there are attempts at distortion and misrepresentation of Tamil literature, Tamil culture, and Tamil identity itself. So the main motivation for this was a peculiar dilemma of the Dravidianist movement at the start of 20th century. It's an interesting topic. I'll just explain it briefly. So when the Dravidianist movement started, it was a racist movement. You know, the Aryan versus Dravidian races propounded by Caldwell. That was the prime mover for this populist movement. It was not an intellectual movement. It was anti-Brahmin and quickly turned into anti-Hindu and then anti-North Indian and anti-Indian itself at some point. But it always spoke of Dravidian and Tamil pride and Dravidian as a superior race compared to Aryans. So to prove that point, they just went to the Tamil culture. But as I already told you, Tamil culture was completely filled with the Hindu ideas, dharmic ideas, the Vedic heritage and everything, and grand temples. So what would they do? You know, so they just started de-Hinduizing everything that came in their way. So they denied the Hinduness of Sangam classics, Tirukkural, Silappadigaram and everything. How did they do it? They suppressed the many references to Vedas, Yajnas, Hindu divinities, Dharma, everything. Just don't bring them to light. You know, in the textbooks, they will choose a Sangam poem which is so general, and they will always try to portray Tirukkural as a secular classic rather than as a Dharma Shastra. And it gets into very ridiculous levels, you know, some idiotic word splitting and funny pseudo etymology, etc. So baseless invention of meanings. So just to give some examples, you know, Tamil being a very ancient language, it has original words for many things. For example, Veda is called Marai in Tamil because it is hidden, Gudha. And Shri has an original Tamil word, Thiru. So you will see Thiru for Shri. And Vishnu has an original Tamil name, Mal. And along with Shri, he becomes Thirumal. So they just started, the Mal also means an enchanter, as we know that Vishnu is the enchanter. So they took these words and they said that Marai is not the Veda, it is some other secret book of Tamils. Okay, Thiru is not Lakshmi, it just means prosperity. But they miserably failed because in some other references it will say non-Marai, meaning 4 Vedas. Then they said, oh, these are not the Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharvana, some 4 other secret books Tamils originally had which were lost. And then there is another literary reference that says non-Marai or Angam, means that 4 Vedas with the 6 Angas, which is like the Vedanga, you know. And of course, the scholars thoroughly exposed these funny things, but unfortunately, at the mass level, some of these ideas spread, and you still see a sizable number of Tamil people brainwashed with ideas like this. And then what they did is that they maligned all the ancient commentaries and they said it was all Brahminical conspiracy, you know. So as I already told you, Tirukkural had 10 commentaries around the 13th century itself, and all of them established the clear meaning of Tirukkural. Then when the Dravidianist movement came, they said that all those commentaries were Brahminical conspiracy to misinterpret Tirukkural, as if now they are reinventing Tirukkural in the 20th century as a new secular text. And then the other thing was the positing Jaina literary works in conflict with the Vedic Hindu literary works, saying that the Jaina works are the truly Tamil ones and the Vedic Hindu texts are all, again a Brahminic conspiracy, without realizing that the syncretism and harmony between both these sects in Tamil literature, as expressed in Tamil literature. And it went into even more ridiculous level. They even started de-Hinduizing Kambaramayanam, saying that, initially they totally opposed it. It was an Aryan conspiracy by this Brahmin stooge called Kamban. And by the way, Kambar was not a Brahmin poet. He came from another craftsman community. Okay? And then they made Kambaramayanam just as a tool for poetry appreciation and ripping apart all the values of dharma and everything from it. Oh, it has good poetry, but there is nothing more to it. And then the Kamban versus Valmiki rift they created, which is baseless. And surprise of the surprises, they started de-Hinduizing the Tamil Bhakti literature itself at some point. It is still going on. So what they say is that the Tamil Shaivam and the Tamil Vaishnavam is so different from the rest of the Shaivam and Vaishnavam in India. So still there are some stupid sociological deconstructions and funny theories being built around this in Tamil Nadu. And the misuse of this Tamil Bhakti hymns to again create a Tamil versus Sanskrit competition in temple worship. Then, so at some point they said that let us replace all the Vedic mantras with the Tamil Bhakti poems in temples. You know, so it is disguised as some very noble thing, but has a very dividing, a breaking India type of agenda. So at the end of it, all this, when you de-Hinduize this whole Tamil literature landscape so thoroughly, it becomes a fertile ground for appropriation by Christian missionaries. Because now you say, you know, the Tamil literature is not Hindu, it is secular, which is baseless. And then the Christians start spinning their own theories on top of it, saying that, you know, Tirukkural has Christian ideas, the Tamil Bhakti poetry has Christian things. So this is how it operates. So all these attempts at distortion and misrepresentation is due to the influence of Dravidianist, Marxist and other separatist ideologies in Tamil Nadu. They have substantially weakened in the social and political sphere. In fact, it's a slow and steady decline, but it has happened. But in the academic, literary and cultural sphere, the influence is still there. It's pretty much there. So rampant distortions continue to be spread. There is a plethora of anti-Hindu, anti-Indian propaganda in the media everywhere. So what we need to do is to counter this through positive discourses, combining the Tamil identity and the Hindu identity and the Indian nationhood, stressing the synergies and their complementary nature. And corrective discourses need to be made, like this talk itself, exposing the false and distorted theories. So the readable and elegant narratives of Tamil literature need to be brought out in both Tamil as well as English. And the literary associations, reader circles, book events, seminars, these are some of the things that need to be done to counter this propaganda. So with this, I conclude my